No one in my family had ever owned a gun. I've never been hunting. I have no interest in hunting. But shooting sports, as they called it in 4-H, was a social activity. It was a competitive activity with the potential to win blue ribbons, and I really like to win blue ribbons. But most importantly, it was something that scared me. It was something that I didn't understand, and I wanted to figure out how so much power could be contained in something so small. So I joined shooting sports, and twice a week for many years, I went here to our local range and shot at homemade targets with a .22 rifle. Now, an important part of the 4-H process is, in addition to the weekly practice, you also have to present a research project to the club. And my dad went to college for chemistry, so I grew up with chemistry sets. I loved taking things apart, pouring different chemicals together, seeing what I could get to fizz or explode or basically break things. And I decided that my research project was going to be to figure out the chemistry of how a bullet worked. And I started by reading the literature, as they recommend, and I learned that a .22 shell is actually very simple. It contains 4 ingredients. At the top is the bullet itself, which is usually made of lead. It sits in this container which is made of brass, which we simply called the brass. Inside the brass is gunpowder, and in the base of the brass is a little tiny bit of plastic explosive. And the way a gun works is when you pull the trigger, a pin strikes the base of the brass, initiates the plastic explosive, which lights the gunpowder, which undergoes a chemical reaction turning from a solid into a gas, and as it expands, it pushes the bullet out at great speed. Makes sense on paper, but at 11 years old, I didn't really believe it. So I went into my father's woodshed and I got out a hacksaw and I started to saw apart bullets. And sure enough, you can saw off the top of a bullet and you can turn the brass upside down, gunpowder will come out, and you can look inside and you can see a little bit of something that looks like plastic in the bottom. So far so good. What they'd written in the books didn't appear to be a lie. But still, I was a curious kid, I was a skeptical kid, kind of had to see it to believe it. And as I sat there looking at these components, I had this hypothesis, which was that I don't actually need a gun to make this chemical reaction work. I just need somehow to get the plastic explosive to ignite. So I go out with a single .22 shell and a hammer into my backyard near where my yellow lab Reggie had his doghouse, and I saw a big boulder. And in Colorado, you can't stick a shovel in the ground and go 2 inches without hitting a stone. So we had an abundance of these boulders. And so I set the .22 shell on the stone, I take the hammer, I slam it down, bang, I see gunpowder, I hear the dog bark, I feel a slight itch in my abdomen, I put my hand there, I see blood, just a trickle, not very much. I don't actually feel very much pain, and I start to think to myself, did I manage to just shoot myself without a gun? And if I did, I deserve a blue ribbon for that. The smoke begins to clear, and I look a little bit closer at what happens, and I realize that I had just experienced Newton's third law of motion in practice. The stone I had selected was not actually flat. There was a slight lip. And so when the bullet had tried to go forward, it couldn't, and the brass had come backwards towards me. Now, it didn't actually go very deep. I didn't go to the hospital. I was actually completely fine. When I presented my research project to the 4-H Club, I neglected to include this part of the experiment. But what I did experience on that day was a new kind of learning which surpassed anything I'd ever read before. It was the experience of a kind of truth that ignited all of my senses. And I will always remember the sound of the shot, the smell of the gunpowder, the feeling in my abdomen, and the taste of surprise and fear in my mouth. And most curious kids, after that experience, might say, it's time to hang up the curiosity jersey. We've had a good run, but we're going to retire now. But not me, for some reason. And while I would never in a million years advocate unsupervised experiments with firearms to anyone, the careful and deliberate progress towards my fears seems to work for me.